Wow.
Yeah, that's what I say as well. So anyway, it's really incredible. Okay, we are online on YouTube. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is the um, 180th session of the Carl Jung Depth Psychology Reading Group. And we are going to talk about these last few items that one of our number put in. And and then we're going to go back to Memory Streams Reflections, which is very interesting for the next part tonight. But anyway, here are the issues that had been raised previously, and so I'm going to talk about this first one. We have to integrate our conscious and unconscious parts. We can become conscious of it in two ways. First, we can fully develop ourselves as a man or woman into one of the archetypes, but even as they behave as an archetype, they should know they are accessing inherent power of being a human, and it is happening to them and they are not doing it. Okay. Um, so I have a few reservations on this point. Um, we have to integrate our uh, conscious and our unconscious minds. That's very definitely true, and um, that's what all religions do. Um, so that is true, but first uh, we can develop ourselves into one of the archetypes. I will have to say no to that. That is not what Dr. Jung said. What Dr. Jung said is that um, the archetypes are already there, and um, and we may intentionally or unintentionally constellate one. That is, make it fire off and make it start to do something with us. And so, for example, the very easy ones are the mother archetype. Once you become a mother, the mother archetype takes you over, and you're going to be going through that mother process for the rest of your life. But by the same token, but maybe a little less pushed, is the warrior archetype, where young men especially have to prove themselves as a man somehow, whatever that process of initiation is. It doesn't necessarily mean going to war or going into the military. It means something like having the strength to do the things that you have to do. So, for example, several of my best friends in life are men who, in our day, when we were at that stage, did not serve in Vietnam in various ways. They either got themselves into graduate school or they went to Canada or what have you. And so that required as much courage and the kind of warrior energy that joining the Marine Corps did for me. And I recognize that. And from a political point of view, um, I was agreeing with them, but but I decided to do the Marines, and but anyway, all young men have to somehow go through some initiation that proves themselves. So for the Maasai warriors, they'll take a 14-year-old young man out and put him out in front of the tribe with a spear, and then they'll go to a lion into attacking him or attacking toward him, and he's got a spear and he has to prove himself by not getting eaten. And so then he knows what being a warrior is, right? So it works in every society, and it just depends on what it is. I mean, being a warrior might be getting a PhD, um, or doing a wonderful work of art. And so anyway, so I don't agree that we become the archetype. We end up causing the archetype to start to play. And once it starts to play, it's like picking a record out of the jukebox. Once it starts to play, it's not going to stop until it plays all the way through, one way or another, for better or for worse. And okay, so then this statement goes, but even as they behave as an archetype, they should know they are crossing inherent power of being a human, and it is happening to them and they are not doing it. Well, you know, it's a collaborative process. I mean, an archetype can't do anything without your life. It can direct the energy of your life, but it's not going to, you know, it's not doing it to you per se. It's your life energy is going through and playing the phonograph record. Okay, your life energy is basically providing the recording needle and the electricity that plays the record, if you will. Any comments on that or questions?
Hi, Skip.
Yeah, go ahead.
My question is, I still don't have the clarity whether going through an archetype is going through an unconscious, or going through an archetype can be both unconscious and conscious. For example, somebody is elected in their municipality, then they are knowing that they're like going through an architect of, for example, a king or whatever. But if they are not aware of architect, then they would be going through it unconsciously. But or is it at all times, if you're going through an architect, that's an unconscious human quality that one is going through? Unless you're completely individuated, then you're not going through an archetype. You're actually expressing your manifest individuality.
Well, okay, there's a lot wrapped up in that. First of all, it can be both conscious and unconscious. So mothers certainly know that they're going through motherhood. Okay, they may not know that the mother archetype exists, but nonetheless, they are conscious of the fact that they're going through this process of being a mother, and you know, they're better off if they understand that this is a record that's going to play through their lives for the rest of their life. And here we have Nick. That's great. Okay, so so you can definitely be conscious of it, but the archetype is always unconscious per se. But if you're aware of archetypes and you're aware of their primary features, let's say, then you can play it out. And what was the rest of your question? Sorry.
It was more about like individuation, whether individuation, maybe we can come to it later, but is individuation conscious, and at the opposite of the spectrum lies the archetype as unconscious, or my thinking is wrong?
Well, I think archetype is at the instinctual level. Okay.
Can a person who is in prison, like in Auschwitz, develop individuation? Does individuation actually require you to be completely independent and free and powerful, or you can be in a very restrictive situation and still develop your individuation?
Well, you are where you are, okay? You are who you are and where you are. And so surely if you're in Auschwitz, you can develop individuation. But individuation per se is recognizing the archetypal urges, okay? Recognizing that that yourself is telling you something, okay? And yourself might be telling you something through the archetypes, right? So individuation is about that. It's about, think of here's the metaphor I was using the other day. Think of an oak tree, okay? The oak tree gets a limb lopped off, okay? Or you lose an arm. Well, then yourself, your unconscious, is going to teach you how to do things without your arm. For an oak tree, its archetypal being is going to have another limb come out from another place, might be from the same place, but a smaller limb coming out, right? Out of that cut, you might see a shoot coming out that's alive, right? And so that's the unconscious of the oak tree doing the next thing, okay? And so for all of us, we get blockages. We get blocked all kinds of ways. Okay, I got blocked by breaking my leg. Okay, so then what are you going to do? Are you going to just go die? Or are you going to pay attention to what your unconscious is telling you should do next? Okay, and so individuation is about becoming sensitive to what you should do next, and understanding that there are two sides of every coin. One side is good and one side is bad, right? Okay. Any other thoughts or comments about that?
That clarified. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nick.
Oh yeah, no, I just thought I'll chip in by adding that I think the way I think of it is that when one is so to speak possessed or living through a particular archetype, then one's choices become defined by the polarities within that archetype. We still have the free will, but basically that boils down to we can choose left or right. But the left or right occurs within the island of a particular archetype. So let's say, take for example, like for me, I think of let's say the archetype of the rock star that commits suicide at 27 years old. This is actually a defined archetype. Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain. And when we look at it from the outside, we're always very good at, they were on drugs, they were on the way down, whatever, But the thing is that no one means to die, and no one wants to die. I mean, you know what I mean? And when we see it archetypally, they are caught in this certain energetic flux, and there is kind of an inevitability to it. So there's simultaneously free will, but there's also a definition, a narrowing of the scope of one's choices within the polarity of the archetype. But that being said,
Right.
Going on simultaneously would be other archetypes, you see. So there can be 3 27-year-old rock stars in that archetype, but there can also be the warrior archetype going on, or there can be the fatherhood archetype. And so one of them might, on the brink of it, come to some realization, I've got my kid. No, I'm not going to do this. And what constellated that choice to not go down the darker path or not take his own life it's something to do with the polarity of the father archetype. You know what I mean? So it can also be the warrior archetype going on.
So there can be more than one archetype playing through, and which is powerful, right?
Yep.
So in 2008, when many of us lost our life savings, I had a friend who had a very, very successful business, here in Annapolis, but when the crash took place, his business was in serious trouble. He was probably going to have to go bankrupt. And actually, I don't know if they went back, if it did go bankrupt, but it's still there because you can pass through bankruptcy. But I know I had suicidal ideation, and he had suicidal ideation. He went out in the middle of the lake in a rowboat and shot himself. Okay, and
Oh shit. Well,
yeah, but
yep, sorry.
meanwhile,
Yep.
yeah, but meanwhile, I was having suicidal ideation too, and I said, "No, wait a minute. Perish that thought. I want to see how this comes out." Okay, and so I just decided that I would see what the consequences would be, and I'm still seeing what the consequences are. Okay, 12 years later, and he isn't. Right, so why that, but the way I dealt with it was I just thought to myself, perish that thought. And every time it came up, I just say, perish that thought. I want to know how this is going to come out. And so I think you're quite right that, someone who isn't firmly attached to something else, like a child or like a warrior that's fighting through, going to get to the top of being an old rocker or something like that. An older Paul from the Beatles. What's his name? Sir Paul.
Or just older.
Older, yeah, or just older. Yeah.
Yep, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's a choice. Remember, there's two streams that are coming up from your psyche. One's a good stream and one's a bad stream. And if you take the bad stream, you might pull the trigger, I suppose. I think that's a way to think about it.
So you guys, I'm going to move over to the YouTube channel so I can listen on my phone and move around.
Okay.
So
thanks for being here, Tim. See you later.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later, Tim.
So there's a couple of questions here. Can the gym be a metaphysical experience? Yes, definitely. It just depends on what's going on. If there's, if you're a guy and there's a beautiful girl in the gym, that in itself could be a metaphysical experience. But it just depends. It depends on the situation, the terrain. Good evening, Art. We're doing well tonight. King of Sheba, that tribe is now extinct. Yeah. Sean says, it's like a rotating syzygy of your spirit, heart and imagination. Think harmony, resonance, and energy. A bird descending off of a cliff and another bird ascending up from the field of the flowers below, and another bird flying midway, all coming into a cosmogenesis in the external moment. Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, look, you literally have thousands of opposites that are playing through in your psyche. And your unconscious is sorting through those all the time. And you may have 10 archetypes that are playing through you one way or another. One is you're a student. One is you're earning money at McDonald's so that you can pay for your school. And you're being very courageous. And very courageous means staying up late to do your work, whatever it is. And many other things are playing through. And it's the balance of all those that is going to decide. And hopefully, to the extent that you can be conscious of the fact that all those things are going on, if you get a crazy idea, like suicide, then wait 10 minutes and rethink it. And then, wait another 12 hours and rethink it again, and so on. And just keep batting that one down until it goes away. That's my layman's response. It's not a psychotherapist response, but that's basically what I did. I can tell you from my experience, that's what I did. And that urge to end my life went away. And so, so it's not that you can't have such a urge. And I'm sure Nick has probably known some people that have had those kinds of urges. And, if you know somebody like that, you have to find a way to talk them down, and it's not going to be done rationally. Probably you have to reach them at a different level than rational. Okay, now then, the next question is, second, each person should know what parts of their memory, emotions such as guilt, shame, jealousy, hate, they carry, how strong are those emotions, and whether it is necessary to keep them at that intensity or less. This will reduce the size of their shadow. Okay, I think we're mixing apples and oranges there a little bit. First of all, it is a good idea to have a meditation practice where you, to some degree, can control your emotions. Okay, that's a good thing. And also, give you a rational perspective on things like shame and guilt. If you do something wrong, if you went to the confessor at the Catholic Church, would that require 10 Hail Marys, or would you have to say Hail Marys for the next 8 hours, in order to get out from under that guilt? So these are all degrees of levels and sizes, as you say, intensity. But I think that I don't think we are able to just turn it down like it can turn down the stove, the amount of heat on a stove. You need practices in your life that help you calm down. So if you have some wacko idea that comes up into your head, count to 100. Do something. Don't just act, but do anything that will slow down the process so that you can reflect on it some. I think that's the best way to think about it. I don't know, is that helpful?
Yes, Gurdjieff lost his father when he was a child. One of the advices, his father was a young man when he died.
Mm-hmm.
One of the advices Gurdjieff's father gave to his young son before dying is, if you ever get angry, wait 24 hours before you respond. And he said he attributed a lot of his good things in life and also his survival on that one blessing his father gave.
Yeah. I think that's very good advice. And then wait a week before you respond. Yeah, it's not just wait 24 hours and then it'll be done. Yeah. No, it doesn't work that way. It may come back and come back and come back. And each time it comes back, you have to bat it down and in one way or another. So if you have practices like meditation practices or any other practice like counting to 100 or waiting 24 hours, that's a practice too. then you get to reflect on it with your conscious mind, with your rational mind, and say, okay, what's this doing to me? And how should I be responding to it in the minute, right? And if you don't know, if your reflection can't tell you, then just put it in an icebox and come back to it in a week or 24 hours or whatever it is. I know I've been having an experience recently, which I'm not going to talk about, but something was coming up out of my unconscious, and I wrote a letter about it, and that got the urge to do something right now, something dramatic. Writing the letter itself got that urge under control, and then I showed it to a couple of friends, and they also advised me to wait, and so that has diffused that experience. And so I'll give you an example. One of the midshipmen that I sponsored did a silly thing, which was when he was a freshman at the Naval Academy, he was going up the stairs in the Naval Academy, and an upperclassman came by him and told him to, look smarter or something like that, that, his uniform wasn't proper or something like that, which are one of the things they're teaching you at the Naval Academy. And he made a comment. The comment was, "Oh, who cares?" Okay, simple as that, a very simple comment. The result of that comment was that he was put on restriction for the entire year, okay? And which was an over-the-top restriction for such a simple little infraction. And I wanted to take him to the Marine Corps birthday ball, which occurred about 6 weeks later. And so I wrote to his company officer, who happened to be a Marine, who I outranked then anyway. And I asked for permission. And this major made some flippant comment like, "I'm not going to pay any attention to him. He's retired, and he's a reservist. I'm not going to pay any attention to him." And I was furious. I was just blotto about it. And so anyway, I wrote a letter to that major, and then I took my midshipman aside one evening. I took him over in the cemetery of the Naval Academy and showed him this letter in the car, and I said, "This is what I'm angry about, because actually, if I wanted to make a big stink about this, I could end this guy's career, right? But the point is, you were wrong in what you did, and he was wrong. And yes, I could do this and create this big hullabaloo, but we have no idea how that would come down on you, and we have no idea how that would come down on this major. And so I'm not going to send this letter." But because I wrote the letter, that calmed me down, and because he saw that what I had done to calm myself down, he calmed down, and the major didn't have any idea what the hullabaloo he caused between the three of us, luckily for him, okay? Because otherwise, I could have pulled rank easily. I still have my commission, and I could have pulled rank gone in and made a stink with the superintendent of the Naval Academy and say this is out of line, and I might have gotten the guy thrown out of the, fired from the Naval Academy. He might have had gone back to a battalion or something like that, instead of having this nice cushy teaching job at the Naval Academy that he had. And so, there are consequences. And so we have to learn from our own experiences how to calm down, settle down, and then on reflection, handle the same situation in a different way. I guess that's the way I would say it. And so, but does it reduce the size of our shadow? No. I'm still pissed off. I'm still mad at that major. And fortunately, enough time has gone by that I've now forgotten his name, fortunately. And my then midshipman did live out his restriction honorably, and he's now lieutenant commander in the Navy. And so, and he's been to the Naval War College, and he's been to the Naval Postgraduate School and a bunch of other things. So his life, and he's got 3 kids, et cetera, et cetera. So his life is coming out better than it would have if, when he was a freshman, I had gone in with guns blasting and made a big stink about it, which I could have. And so sometimes you just have to let things go, but it's not easy. I mean, emotion can be intense, but as I say, it doesn't reduce the size of my shadow. My shadow about that incident is still immense.
Did it help you being an introvert? Because I thought that extroverts and introverts would handle a social situation differently. And if a person is an introvert, what tips do you have for them? Or if a person is an extrovert under such stressors?
Well, I think that an extrovert tends to, and I don't know, not being an extrovert, so I can't really say, I don't have that experience per se, but my sense of it would be that an extrovert tends to wear their heart on their sleeve, right? And so if something happens to them, they'll come back with their fists flying or something. And as an introvert, I tend to process things more. And so, just for an example, when I used to change schools, and I changed schools 13 times in 17 years, okay, and the 17 years of school I went to 13 different schools. And so I learned from that experience to just be quiet at the beginning, because within 6 months, people will understand my value to the group and they will include me. So it doesn't matter that I'm not included right at the beginning, but an extrovert might jump in and try to be a little arrogant and so on. And that maybe is not a good strategy, especially in that kind of a situation where you're going into a new place or not, or such. Okay, so then the question is, and final part, which might happen at the end of life, is to be an individuated person, being at peace and accepting their individuality as nature wanted them to be, not what society wants them to be. Well, I think, that's about individuation. That's about the segment of Memories, Dreams, Reflections we're going to talk about tonight. And I do agree that if you are individuated, that is, you've brought into consciousness all of your opposites, or as many as possible, and dealt with them, then at the end of your life, you can die happy. Okay, you can die satisfied. That's wholeness, right? So the oak tree that gets its limb cut off, it maybe puts out a different shoot in that same stump, right? And it goes on being an oak tree, and it lives its 100-year life or whatever it is. That oak tree is still whole. Okay, it's run into the slings of arrows of life, which we all do. Okay, and so we all face controversy, blockages, you name it. It happens all the time. And we're problem-solving creatures. So we're facing 100 problems a day. Okay, 100 problems a day. You know, just beginning with getting food in us, you know, evacuating our bowels and bladder. All those things are problems that we have to learn to deal with properly to be a mature adult human being. And then we have to face the fact that our spouse is opposite to us. Okay, if we're white, they're black, and you know, almost every time I say anything with my wife, she'll disagree with me on anything. But you have to learn that that's the way it works, because then you find a middle ground between where she is and where you are, right? So, and unfortunately, we don't teach young people that well enough. And so very often marriages fall apart because, you know, here's the thing, when you're courting and trying to decide to get married, it's all very exciting and you're focused on one another. But as soon as you get married, then, you know, you have this honeymoon period where everything seems to be wonderful. And then all of a sudden you start to find little cracks, little things that are different than you thought they would be, or they disagree with you in some way. You know, it's men or women, both. And so, you know, you have to learn to take a breath and remember the old yin yang Taoist symbol, right? You're both going through that. And let's just for the sake of those that are not familiar with this, we'll just bring it up. Here's the yin yang symbol as it relates to men and women. We see things differently. Very simply, we see things differently. You know, you go on Facebook, women are much more interested in nature and natural things. So you go on Facebook and you'll see any number of bug and bunny memes and little funny videos and cutesy little things. And so here's the yin yang symbol, and you know, it's got the feminine and the masculine here, and these are always going around and around and around. This is a moving circle here. And so if you move into a certain space, she'll move out of that space, and so on. And you have to know that that's the process. And that's the joy of working through that stuff is what a good marriage is about. That's why people who are married 50 years, you know, more power to them, because they have been able to work through those things for 50 years. Okay, so let me look here. Do we have the thoughts, or do the thoughts have us? I think the thoughts have us. And, you know, it's pretty, you know, it would be pretty hard. You could have a thought that you would like to be a great artist, and you go and you buy all the paints and and you look at a Jackson Pollock, let's say, you buy the same paints. He used to work with automotive paint, okay? And he'd be out there in his garage dripping this paint around, and then people would pay him thousands of dollars for those paintings. And you say, oh, I could do that, right? I could do that. What's hard about that? I mean, that's like finger painting in kindergarten. Well, but the thing is, there is a certain je ne sais quoi that if you don't have it, you're not going to, you're not going to stick with it. You'll get bored with it. And so you will probably never be a Jackson Pollock. Nobody will. Okay, nobody that can hear this now, none of us will probably ever be a Jackson Pollock. I think I've seen a few people try, a few artists that have tried, and they've done a commendable lot of art in different ways. But Jackson Pollock just had a certain thing about him that made him unique.
That's why, Skip, I don't have my channel. I attend your channel.
You have a what channel?
I do not have my own YouTube channel. That's why I attend your channel.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. That's fine. Do we have, okay, so Sherman says, that is what I try to ask as a chronic overthinker, or possession, as Jung put it. Yeah, I mean, certainly if you constellate an archetype, it does possess you. Okay, there's no choice about it, and all you have to do is look at a mother. The mother archetype is the most powerful one, in my view. That's my opinion. And if that archetype gets a hold of a woman, it will never let go. Okay, once you're a mother for life, right? Even if your children are 60 years old, and you're going to be a mother for life. You may be lots of other things, but you're going to be a mother for life. And so that's what that's about. And that archetype has you. So let's see. The wicked will never know peace, but their deeds will continue. They are their own torturers. Well, what can I say? A person who's totally materialistic. If we look at the President of the United States right now, from a materialistic point of view, he has gotten everything he ever wanted, okay? Or everything most of us could ever dream of having, right? All the material things. But the thing is he happy? He's not, okay? Nobody can tell me that that man is living a happy life, or that he has been happy all the times that they played ruffles and flourishes for him when he went to a campaign rally. Okay, it might puff him up a bit for a few minutes while they play the tune, but when he goes back, is that man happy? Is there anybody that can make a case that he is? So anyway, do archetypes operate within the individual only symbolically? For example, would a warrior archetype become stronger in the life of someone who joined a military, engaged in combat? Well, they certainly don't act only symbolically. They certainly release the energy that is necessary and at the right moment. And you can be, let's say you were in Patton's army and you were a guy that has worked your way up to be a corporal, and you have been working through to the war zone. You're very courageous because you joined the army yourself, and you knew you were going to go to the war, and you're courageous. But in that movie Patton, George C. Scott in the beginning gives the famous speech that Patton gave to his troops before the Third Army went into the Battle of the Bulge. And what he said is, when you put your hand into a bunch of goo that a moment before was your best friend's face, you'll know what to do. Okay, that's the constellation of the warrior archetype there, okay? You may be courageous up to then, but what you need to be a warrior in battle is not about logic. It's not about, oh, gee, I'd like to wear that uniform and carry a rifle and defend my country. All those things are very nice from a rational point of view, but the archetype constellates itself at that moment, okay? When your Humvee gets blown up by an IED in Afghanistan or Iraq, and you're trying to save the lives of the men around you, and one has his leg blown off and another has his arm blown off, and you're the only one still there, you then act out of the archetype. Okay, that's when you have the energy. I mean, it didn't happen to me that particular way, but one time I was in an auto accident when I was 18 years old, and I was in a head-on collision. I wasn't driving, fortunately. I was in the back seat, but the fellow 2 seats to my right was killed. The guy next to me had his collarbone broken in 2 places and his pelvis broken in 2 places. I had my jaw broken, and after the 2 cars that hit head on came to a stop, I was the only one still conscious. Okay. And I just knew what to do in that circumstance and did the necessary. And it wasn't a question of thinking about it. Okay, let's just mistake, right? And so maybe that's the archetypal emergency medicine technician or something like that. Although I wasn't really doing emergency medicine per se, but I was doing a lot of things in the 15 minutes after that car accident when I was the only one conscious on the scene. And so, you know, those are things that happen from the archetypal layer. Okay, so going on. He has also said in 40 years of practice, he did not find one exception to this fact among his patients, that when they have fully individuated, they will be at complete ease and comfort with their religion at birth, because the ego will have good relationship with God image and will know the inherent good of all religions, being the fact that they bring about a healthy relationship between the ego and the God image. Okay, there's a lot of projection in this statement, so I'm going to show you the statement again on the screen so everybody can read along with me.
Can you remind me again whose statements these are?
No, the person that gave them to me is anonymous.
Oh, okay.
For the purpose,
I thought we were reading them from
we are reading a series of statements that were sent to me.
Oh, okay.
I'm not revealing the source of them.
Oh,
okay.
right.
However,
Okay.
I am responding to them.
Okay.
And, you know, when I received these in an email, I said, my God, I can't respond to this in an email. You're asking me to write the 20 volumes of the collected works, you know. So let's take this one sentence at a time. He also said in 40 years of practice, he did not find one exception to this fact among his patients, that when they have fully individuated, they will be at complete ease and comfort with their religion of birth. No, he did not say that. He said that those who found the religious instinct in man could then individuate. It did not cause them to go back to their religion of birth per se. What they got was a religion is real. It's something that I have to pay attention to. It did not say that that person would go back to the religion of their birth, not at all. It only said if they did not find a religious instinct or the religious within themselves, they would not be healed. They would not be cured. And so it wasn't just automatic that you could get there. And most people aren't fully individuated. We're all individuating constantly. You know, I'm not fully individuated, and nobody is. We individuate throughout life, but some of us have more experience with it than others. So anyway, because the ego will have good relationship with the God image and will know the inherent good of all religions, being the fact that they bring about a healthy relationship between the ego and the God image. No. They do get a relationship with the self, which is the God image. You know, if somebody were to go through Jungian analysis, presumably they would get a good connection with the ego, or between the ego and the self, meaning they will have integrated, brought into their consciousness the things that relate to the self, so that they know so that they can hear the promptings from the self. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you find the inherent good in all religions. I mean, you can individuate and still think people in another religion are wrong, terribly wrong, deathly wrong. Okay, so it doesn't bring about, it doesn't create an instant liberal or anything like that. but it might give one pause. It might cause one to think a little bit more about those kinds of issues, but I don't think we know or accept just because you're individuated doesn't mean that you see the inherent good in all religions, not by a mile. Okay, so Jung said, scientifically, we cannot prove existence of God, but in human psyche, there is a center that is called the God image across entire humanity, and it is larger than humanity, and that can be established by experience. Okay. I think he would say that you can prove the existence of God, and that's what analytical psychology does. And he defined God as equal to, at the end of his life, he finally let the secret out. At the end of his life, he said that God equals the unconscious, very simply. So it's not only, it's our unconscious because it drives us. And I'll talk about, at the end of this paragraph, I'll talk about why it drives us, how it drives us. But our God image does drive us forward. Number one, that's the self. or the greater personality, depending on which name you want to give it. And there is the same in the wider scope of humanity, which is the collective unconscious. So the collective unconscious is all of humanity, but it's also in various pockets. So it's not the same everywhere necessarily. So for example, if you're an American, your collective unconscious is different from that of an Italian or you know, a Spaniard or a Frenchman, you know, or an Indian, let's say. And so anyway, so I will get to that in a moment. But anyway, Jung would encourage patients to listen carefully to those who are against us or criticize us, and also to anything that brings us strong emotions, such as anger or fear. It will reduce the shadow. Yeah, I mean, in simple terms, that I'm not saying it reduces the shadow, it makes us aware of the shadow. Whether we then integrate the shadow and can work with it in our lives is a different matter altogether. And so anything that makes you mad, that's within you. Okay, too. Okay, that's a part of your shadow. And so when that happens, when you're incredibly angry with someone, then you have to work with that. Okay, so that's what I have to do vis-a-vis the president, because he very often makes me angry, but very often I have to admit that if I were in his position, I would do exactly the same thing. And so that's in my shadow. The fact that if I were in his position, I would probably do something very similar to what he does. Whatever it is that makes me mad, probably if I have to put myself in his shoes and say, yeah, you know, I admit that's in my shadow, and I need to integrate that and cool my jets a bit. That's sort of the idea. So now in terms of this God image thing, let's talk about what that means in terms of Dr. Jung's oeuvre. He was always talking about the 2 million-year-old man. Okay, now what he meant by that was the psyche that has developed evolutionarily over many millions of years. I mean, in his day, they probably thought about it as 2 million years, but today we can easily put it back to 3.5 billion years ago. In other words, all of us are descended from millions of ancestors who have done two things successfully. They have survived until they reproduced. Okay, they have survived until they reproduced. Every generation of our ancestors, every single one of us did that. Okay, going back to single-celled organisms, which our ancestors once were. We all have a grandma and a grandpa that were single-celled organisms. Okay, and so going all the way back to then up to our physical form today, every one of those generations of ancestors survived until they reproduce. So that put in us this self, this God image that knows better in many cases, and it's worried about our survival. And so, you know, you see it in many cases. I mean, just think of how women tend to love kitty cats. Well, maybe they love kitty cats because they're small and controllable. And in their deep unconscious, there were big, nasty lions going back hundreds of generations. Okay, and those big lions were very scary creatures. But now, because we've downsized cats to the point where they can be controlled, now a woman doesn't have to be that worried about having an image of a cat in her psyche, because those cats were threats to their young, or to our ancestors' young. So same is true of snakes. And so if you know you can control something, it's like, why does the news always put a bloody story on the 11 o'clock news? Okay, well, they do it because you can see that bloody story and then know you're safe from it, and then you can sleep. No kidding, that's the way it works. And so you see something horrific on the news and it's shocking, but you know that you can survive, because it's not affecting you. And so it's controllable. I mean, the same thing with a horror movie or a vampire movie. You can go to this movie which is about vampires, and it can have all this terrible stuff in it. And then you get up from your seat after the show and you can say, oh, wow, those don't really exist. Or, I'm still here even having seen that terrible narrative of the vampire. And so that's not so bad after all, because anybody will tell you that there are not any actual things that are vampires, except, you can quibble with exceptions. But anyway, so Opdog says, as opposed to, okay, we had talked about symbolic battles. These are real battles, actually. And even if they're battles that are going on in the psyche, they're real. They're very real. Sean says, the goddess of mercy was with you that day as well, Skip. It reminds me of the shrine you showed us from Japan. My advice to anyone who is struggling, don't lose your way. Engrave those words into your heart. Yep, don't lose your way. So it's very true. I'll share the image that Sean is talking about, because I keep it on my desktop for just such an occasion as this. Just a moment, I have to find it on my desktop, which is currently covered by Zoom and YouTube, but I probably can find it in a New York minute here. Come on. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so here she is. Let me get the correct screen on my screen. There we go. Okay. All right, so this image is Ofuna Canon. And Ofuna Canon, during my high school years, from the time I was 15 to the time I was 17, was a very soothing image to me. It's very large. It's like 60 feet tall, and it's very bright out there on a hilltop, and at night it's lit up so everybody can see it. And And what I found was that whenever I would see this statue at least once a day when I was coming home from school. And every day when I was feeling upset about something that was going on, either I got a bad grade in a test or whatever it was, I would see her, and there was just something about her that I found very soothing, which is this is called Kannon in Japan. It's Kuan Yin in China, and it's referred to as the goddess of mercy. Well, I didn't learn until much later that this statue was built to redeem the souls of the Japanese men who had been killed in World War II. And Kuan Yin's myth is that she goes into hell and she finds the souls of these people and brings them out of hell. And so, you know, obviously that's a soothing idea for the living, because in most of those cases, those men didn't have any choice. I mean, they too got drafted into the military. They went to war. They did what they had to do based on where they were at their time and place. And they weren't particularly evil people as individuals. And so they could be redeemed. And so this is like the same function as the harrowing of hell of Jesus Christ, who went into hell for 3 days and brought back the souls of, redeemed the souls of those that were there that shouldn't be there or shouldn't be there permanently. And so that is the result, the purpose of this idea. And there's another canon that I have gone to many times because it was very near the great Buddha of Kamakura. And at that canon, it's called Hase canon. It's within a few hundred yards of the great Buddha. At Hase canon, you see all these little statuettes about this high. And those tend to be statuettes of Kuan Yin or Kannon. And what they are, or they're put there, and they're there in their thousands at Hase Kannon. And women who have had abortions go there and leave one of these statuettes as a way to redeem the soul of the child that they have aborted, so that they could go on living. And so it's a very painful and poignant fact, but that's what that is. And of course, all
I
the
can totally relate to that one. In my, sorry if I
go ahead.
Please don't forget what you're saying. In my high school 12th grade, we had biology laboratory, and there were like jars of all sizes, and there are fetuses who were either born dead, or I don't know if they were miscarriages or abortions. So I didn't know their history, but there are human fetuses in all shapes, all sizes of jars. Not all shapes, they're all cylindrical, but visible. They were immersed in some kind of liquid, probably alcohol or something.
Yeah.
It was very painful to be there. So the question was always on my mind, what can I do? At least one act during this 1 year that I could actually make a difference, because I couldn't banish them. There was also one skeleton, actual human skeleton, that they had cleanly, like it was dry and standing, and wires had connected all the doings. So a day came where we had to choose between dissecting what they call it a China rose or a frog. And one other classmate and I were the only two who actually opted for the China rolls. I said, I'm not gonna dissect the frog.
Mhm.
Frog were put through formaldehyde or something that they're unconscious and their body is open. And eventually through 30 to 45 minutes of this lab procedure, they will eventually, their heart will stop.
Mhm.
But I said, now I feel so good because in frog community, I have saved at least one life.
Yeah. Amen. Amen to that. Amen to that. And, you know, to this day, I have difficulty killing anything. I mean, I remember when I was like 10 years old, and I remember the sidewalk near my house would have tons of ants on it. And I would just look down at these ants and say to myself, well, now you're alive. And then I'd step on them, now you're dead, you know, type thing. But since I started practicing Buddhism, I find it very difficult to even kill an ant. I sometimes do it if I absolutely have to. But even an ant, I will try to pick up and put outside if I can, so that it will live its own life. And, you know, and mind you, I was trained to be an underpaid, oversexed killer, right, as a Marine. So I was trained to kill, but didn't.
Well, to that point, I'll add, I think I shared this maybe with Idris already, that, and in fact, on the advanced reading group, I think I might have suggested that if there's a singularity of truth, that it would be all, life is sacred.
I remember.
And yeah, and you know, so I've been very interested in the benefits of vegan as a diet, as I've said before. But I now realize for me that it's not a realistic expectation, and it's another ideology, veganism. And
Sure.
the reason I say that is because it dawned on me that if there was a rat that walked by, I would in no short order go after it and kill it, because I live in a rather unique place. You can actually look this up. In Alberta, we are supposedly still rat free. And in fact, we have a rat patrol that you can call, and they descend with all the weapons necessary to get any rats, because we're unique in that the Rocky Mountains on our west prevent the rats from coming from British Columbia, and we've managed to defend the borders to the east and south to keep rats out. So anyway, so what I'm getting at is the even to say life is sacred is not, to me anymore, a what I would say a singularity of truth.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hypocrisy. I mean, you know, as the Buddhists will tell you, all life lives on other life. And so if you go to the grocery store, everything that you're going to eat, everything that you're going to buy at the grocery store that you're going to eat was once alive. And so
in the last few centuries, the only acceptable use of power that might be deadly force is legitimately actually given only to the state. So only state has, because they're given this duty and responsibility of protecting the citizens. So having a police, having an army, and all sorts of army, like Air Force and land and marine, it's part of a healthy human community, and it's absolutely needed. It has to be the use of violence and force is only legitimate if state has it, and not individuals per se. So a lot of countries are actually having a lot of problems because their state is weakened, and then individuals take the law in their own hands. But also I wanted to say,
that's a luxury. It's a luxury that we have as human beings, okay? Because all life lives on other life. And if you watch David Attenborough's program, Nature or something like that, Nature in Africa or whatever, I mean, they're man, they're like charnel houses. He'll show this species, and then this species is eating this species, and this species is eating this species, and so on. And it's just, there's constant, as Jung said, devouring and begetting that's going on.
I would like to add, though, for the record and everyone listening, that I'm against animal abuse. And indeed, like right now in Ontario, there's a bill 156, which is going to prevent anyone from photography around a slaughterhouse. So therein is a different issue, though, and that is animal abuse. So and then the law is actually, our constitutional rights are actually being violated. Freedom of press, freedom of protest and such is being seriously curtailed because these slaughterhouses don't want people to see what these practices that have become within them. So there's it's this fine line, but I would go back to say to any person who says I'm a vegan, well, did you ever smack a mosquito that landed on you? So we're faced constantly with some reconciliation of the opposites, right? And that's what this is all about.
That's the reality. Opdog here says, I'm a young man in my early 20s and often feel I am drawn toward the warrior archetype. I often feel conflicted as I am ideologically drawn toward nonviolence and generally peaceful living. Is there any hope for me to embody this archetype? Should I give up on becoming a warrior and find another path?
Could I try answering that?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Because the warrior archetype was raised earlier. Someone also raised that the wicked will never know peace. Well, I've been thinking that we have to also ask ourselves, is it not wicked to be passive? And in fact, this might be where most of us, of the 8 billion people on the planet, are situated, in some sort of comatose passivity. And indeed, being a warrior is actually standing up for truth. And if we're passive bystanders to allowing truth not to be actually revealed, then we are the wicked ones. And so the warrior can be just someone who's saying, I'm not going to tolerate injustice and abuse in our systems, our laws. Skip, you've battled systemic issues down there.
Right.
So that's being a warrior.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have to be a military style warrior or member of a gang or something like that in order to play through the warrior archetype. I mean, you can also be a warrior for Christ and go do ministry, or you can be a protesting warrior who protests violently or non-violently. In other words, all the people in the United States that we've seen protesting in the last few weeks, they have largely been peaceful. Okay, they've been nonviolent, but persistent. That is a kind of warrior, okay? To be able to maintain one's nonviolence, but still be persistent about what you believe. That's being a warrior.
I totally. Oh, sorry. I'm just saying I
Go
totally
ahead.
agree. I'm just saying I totally agree that because I totally agree with Miles also. But I think at the same time, things are so complicated and charged that I was going to say that sometimes being a warrior means to be there and to persist, but actually kind of by doing nothing, but being present. So you're definitely not passive, because doing nothing is not nothing. When I say doing nothing, I mean you know exactly where you stand, and you stand. You do show up.
Sure.
Because I think that with everything so charged nowadays, the tendency is it's so easy to get sucked in to emotions, passions, or just
Right.
stuff. I mean, like
And maybe being a warrior, as you rightly say, is staying in your chair, hating what you're seeing on the television at any given moment. I mean, obviously, our president is trying to trigger us into some sort of violent action. And as soon as we take violent action, that's going to be the end. Okay, because then he'll come, then he has an excuse to come back with violence, which is what he would love to do. It's not that the National Guard would love to do it, not at all, or the police necessarily would love to do. 99.9% of all police officers are very respectful individuals who know that their role in the community is to protect and serve and protect, whatever. And so, we're right to protest the existence of things that are designed to trigger our hatred. Okay, that's hate speech. Okay, so for example, over and over again in my lifetime, the Confederate flag has been used as a way to trigger people. But, the more times it gets brought up, the more times we remember that the people who carried the Confederate flag were traitors. And Robert E. Lee had been the superintendent. He had been the superintendent of of West Point. He was the boss of West Point, and yet he became a traitor to the United States. And so how are we supposed to honor those people and still have our society? We can respect them in the sense that they were warriors too, and they stood for what their cause was, but their cause wasn't right. Just because they were courageous and stood for what they believed in doesn't mean that their cause was right. We used to, 10 years ago, we used to have the Virginia flaggers down here who would go along Interstate 95, the main interstate that goes down the East Coast of the United States. And they would, every so often, they'd put a Confederate flag up. And, if you went and talked to any of those people today or 10 years ago, they would say that, they were honoring the courage of, the Confederate soldiers. And so we can respect the courage of the Confederate soldiers, but, I'd be very surprised if any of them would think at that time or today that going back to slavery is a good idea, notwithstanding the fact that we've just changed the name, right? So we have slavery, we just don't admit it anymore. Okay, but in terms of the kind of slavery that was in the South from the early 1600s till 1865, where people were kept in chains and whipped and not paid anything and so on, and treated like property, that slavery did end, okay? But we just changed it so that now we do that in for-profit prisons where, you know, business executives don't want to pay the minimum wage, so they have their judges send kids to jail for 10 years for some sort of minor drug offense, and then they make them work in the prison, and they sell their services from the prison. That's what the for-profit prisons are doing in the United States. And so they'll sell their services for $1 an hour or something like that, instead of $7.50 to $7.25 an hour. And so that's a kind of slavery too. We just don't call it that. We've changed the name.
Well, and there's also injustices with respect to people who are vulnerable being brought in. For example, in Canada, the worst locations for the virus are the slaughterhouses, and the people that are working for those companies, most of which are privately owned, are often refugee people, new immigrants, or working visa people who are basically directed or in some cases really pushed into these dangerous jobs, and jobs that, you know, like nobody else wants to be killing 10,000 pigs a day, but
Right.
these poor people have to. And that's where, again, this bill 156 in Ontario, where it's what they call an ag gag law,
Mhm.
those have been fought in the United States, in many states, and successfully defeated because it's abhorrent to freedom of speech.
Well,
I would like
right.
to say something.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to respond to this gentleman who wants to display his archetype of warrior in his lifetime. A warrior, a true warrior, will be courageous in all their dealings. They will be generous. They will be forgiving. They would be kind to their neighbors, to their women folk and small children, and to the elderly in their own families. They will be there when somebody needs to move, somebody wants to repair something. They would be the one who would be first to attend with somebody as their family members at the emergency, or with their neighbor. These are all acts of courage.
Yeah.
I know
Absolutely.
I lived on university residence for a few years. There are some exceptional human beings who on the nights of the exam, they would actually go and give company to some other stranger, not blood related, another student, sacrificing many hours of preparation for their own exam, but they would go to the hospital with that person. And also raising strong daughters, strong sisters. When I was 12 or 13 and there was an insecure night, there was a young, beautiful woman who was probably returning from work, and she requested me if I can actually sit with her in a taxi until she arrives at her home, because she was afraid of traveling in the taxi alone. And I felt this very strong rush of fear myself. But I said, here, I'm not going to step back. She needs my help.
Mhm.
And I traveled really long distance the other way back on a bus, but with her, with a complete stranger. And I sat right behind the driver, and I know all the thoughts that went through my mind at that point. If he starts taking a wrong direction, what am I supposed to? I was not very big. I was 12 or 13. But then after that day was over, I felt good. And also I thought that if I have daughters, I will make sure they'll teach them self-defense. They
Mhm.
have to know karate, taekwondo, something where at least they will be less vulnerable than not knowing it. So these are all forms of courage and being warrior. Just
Right.
develop your strong community around yourself.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, my favorite beatitude from the Bible is blessed are the peacemakers. And when I was an active officer in the Marine Corps, that's what I thought myself thought of myself. I was a peacemaker. I wasn't I wasn't a murderer. I was trying to keep peace in the world in one way or another. And I think a lot of soldiers and military people think of themselves in that way. And so they aren't all blood and guts, loving it. I mean, just because you're serving doesn't mean that you want to go out and kill people. It means that you want to defend your country. Now, there's a comment here. The American founding fathers were traitors too. Yes, they were. There were 4 of them that lived in my city here, Annapolis, Maryland. And I'm always humbled by those men, because on one street corner, there are 2 of their homes, and these homes are massive. And they were built 300 years ago, these homes. And today they would be still a massive home. I mean, they're at least 5,000 to 10,000 square foot home with servant quarters and the whole smash. And so when those men signed the Declaration of Independence, they were becoming traitors for something that they really believed in, and something that turns out they were right and the British Crown was wrong. And so the question is, for a warrior, do you stand for something or not? Now, if you stand for something and lose, then you don't have a right to, revivification, although people keep trying to bring them back, they can't, because the rest of us don't let them. And what's finally happening now is their monuments are getting torn down because of the attitudes that still exist in a certain community in the U.S. Those monuments are now getting ripped down, and today the Confederate flag was removed from the flag of Mississippi, which I guess was the last holdout. And so the human species has always been looking for a better way. I'm not saying that the United States has the better way perfectly or even imperfectly, but over time we learn what the better way is, and the discernment of the majority of our species keeps making that decision. What is the better way? And it's not a good way to be a traitor. Okay, let's take John Bolton as an example. John Bolton is a traitor to his country for not coming forward with information that implicates the President of the United States when he could have. And then he was a double traitor, because he then was a traitor to the President of the United States by writing his book and putting it out. And so, what are we supposed to do with a man like that? Okay, yeah, he may make some money selling a book, but is he redeemed in the eyes of the rest of us? I really doubt it. I mean, he may achieve some political advantage in the short run, but I don't think history will be kind to him. And more because he's a double traitor than because he wrote a book. anybody can talk about that. So, but I mean, he's a warrior too. He's standing for what he believes in. And so the question is, sometimes we believe in cockamamie things. Okay, all of us do. I mean, it's me too. I acknowledge that sometimes we believe in wrong things. And the question is, can we integrate that and become better people in the process, reach a higher stage of consciousness so that we can be better human beings? And if we can, then the human species will survive. If we can't, then, and we give the wrong person the power to use nuclear weapons, and I don't mean only in the United States, but there's a lot of people around the world that have power to use nuclear weapons. Do they have the right mental faculty to know when is the right time to do that? I don't know.
I think what we need to do is to step up and start having more conversations within communities such that we are maybe even improving our government systems. Because when I look at government here or in the United States, there hasn't been any change in governance insofar as the way to involve more people in a constructive manner. And and I think the United States still, it's two houses, the House of the Representatives and Senate, and similarly in Canada we have the Senate and we have the House of Commons, but where there's the elected officials. But that hasn't changed here for 150 years. And I think people need to become more involved, maybe a new level of government, where people come together to have constructive conversations to reconcile more of these issues. But we're still just leaving these big decisions in the hands of a very small amount of people, with not giving them much direction other than once every 4 or 5 years voting them in or out. Right.
Well, when things get bad enough, Miles, we're going to vote them out. we keep hoping, and then it doesn't happen because they find ways to trick us. I like to get through these last 4 points tonight so that we can go on to something else tomorrow or next week. But all right, so let's see. So he says, Jung said men have spirit, and that has receptive qualities that can approximately be called feminine. He named it anima. Yeah, okay, I'll accept that statement as such. Women also have qualities, and those are called animus. And I think they can be also called spirit in a certain context. So then women have soul, and it has qualities of active force that can be approximately called masculine. He called it animus. Well, we all have soul, okay, and we all have spirit, men or women. We see things slightly differently, and that's as it should be, because women have different responsibilities to life and in life than men do. And so, without women, there's no humanity, okay? There's no human existence. And so yes, the animus is more like a man in a certain sense, but I think that both have spirit and both have soul. Remember, the Red Book starts out with, my soul, where have you gone? I have you forsaken me, or something like that. So Dr. Jung was looking for his soul, and women can also look for their soul, and they do. But the reason it's called anima or animus, is it is the animating feature within our psyche. Think of it that way. So the animus motivates the woman to do things. The anima motivates men to do things, typically. I mean, leaving aside issues of LBGQ, where that is in different, the anima and the animus are in slightly different proportions, but we're all animated by something. I don't know, is that helpful?
Yeah, that's very helpful. I didn't ever before make the connection that it relates to the word animate. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's something that animates us. So Jung said we fall in love with another person who has qualities of our anima and animus, and this is ego falling in love with self. No. This is what animates us to fall in love with someone, but it's not falling in love with self. Self is something else. And so, I often show the picture of my mother at age 18. Well, okay, she's my anima. I can say that quite clearly. And she, if I see a woman that looks more or less like my mother, which I can show here, wait a minute. I'll just show her. Okay, so if I see a woman who has dark hair framing her face, and probably red lipstick and dark eyes like my mother had, if she has those features, then my anima says, wow, that's the woman for you, Skip. And in fact, the women who I fall in love with typically have that, including both of my wives. But that's not my soul. That's not myself there. That's just the way I look at the world. Now, if my mother had been blonde, then I would see a different person as the ideal one.
Can we say that that's the most beautiful part of ourselves? Like for a man, the most beautiful part of them, their being, would be their anima, and for a female, the most beautiful part of it would be their animus?
Well, I think there can be a lot of opinions on what's beautiful about you, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your anima. Okay, in other words, what's beautiful about you, Idris, is, I don't see anything womanly about you, and I don't see that you match my anima, but I think you're a beautiful person in many ways, and you contribute.
Thank you.
You contribute to our lives in many ways, but that doesn't have anything to do necessarily with your anima or my anima. It can have to do with 100 things. 95 of them are unconscious to both of us. Okay, they're just an interaction between the two of us. And we may not be conscious of it. So let me bring this back up again here. Sorry, I'm learning how to use my iPad. So, all right. Self is a large set that includes ego and personal unconscious and collective unconscious. Yes, okay, I will accept that statement. Finally, imagine self as the largest circle and everything else mentioned above being inside it as small circles. Well, it's not necessarily always inside. Let me just share with you again. Let's see, I have some. Where is it? Wait a minute. Is it this one? I'm just looking for a graphic that Edward Edinger put together. And I should be able to find it here momentarily.
It was the representation by Mr. Edinger who showed how ego and self.
Yeah,
the ego is
separate.
inside
Yeah,
at the time of birth, and slowly it comes out.
right. That's the one. Just a minute. Heck, I keep losing these things, and I think I put them in a safe place where I can get them quickly, and then lose them again. All right. Well, anyway, just envision this: the self, the ego. All right, the self holds the ego at the beginning of life. The ego is inside. Then gradually, as we get a little older, the ego starts to emerge from the self. And you know that the ego is developing when the child says no to its parent. Then the child is identifying itself as something different from parent. So it can therefore say no, all right? And then gradually that gets more and more until later in life, here's your ego and here's the self, except the self is really still, the ego is really still in the self, but there's an axis between the ego and the self too. There's a connection between the ego and the self. And that axis has to be strong. And everything else in life is unconnected to that. So what happens with this 2 million year old man, all of our instincts and that sort of thing, is that it knows better than we do what we need, and it's constantly presenting to us. It's not only, I just had a dream for a minute, or I had a vision for a minute. It's presenting things that it thinks we need to know all the time. Okay, and the psyche has no lost activity. Okay, in other words, it unfailingly tells our heart to beat 72 times a minute. That's a pretty complicated activity, just that. Okay, it unfailingly tells our lungs to breathe 12 times a minute. And almost never do we think of those two things. Okay, it tells us when we're hungry. It tells us when we need to use the bathroom. Um, and so it's giving us messages, either consciously or unconsciously, all the time. Now, dreams and visions are also that. But the psyche developed long, long, long before there was ever any language. Okay. And so, how did the psyche do it? It did it with images. Okay. So, you have an image, if you have an image of a snake in a tree, then, that startles you because, your ancestors a couple million years back were living in trees and snakes were the predator. And you had to be aware of that. And so, or if you have this impulse of just like you're falling when you're in bed sometimes, that's an instinct that was put in you by evolution millions of years ago so that you wouldn't fall out of the tree when you were sleeping. It woke you up. And so, still to this day, we have that instinct, and sometimes something happens to us in our something happens to us in bed or maybe in a little dream that activates that instinct, and we wake up with a start. And it's a waking up as if we feel like we're falling, but we're not. And so all those messages are coming to us constantly from our psyche. And so that's why we have to pay attention, because our psyche, our self, is so much wiser than we are. It's so wise that it kept all of our ancestors alive for billions of years. Okay, going back to single-celled beings, all of our ancestors were kept alive by those instincts. And we can't just cut them off. If we cut them off, then we have to be able to survive based on only what we know in the physical world and are conscious of. And I can promise you, if that's the way you have to live, something is going to get you, right? Something will get you. And so the trick is to learn how to listen to the self. And the self communicates in many, many different ways. It communicates with you with pain. It communicates to you with symptoms in a disease. It communicates with you with slips of the tongue, all kinds of things. And what you have to be is sensitive enough to recognize those warnings, because, by the way, yourself is a lot more powerful and stronger than you are, and you are entirely dependent upon it. You're dependent upon it for all the functioning of your body, including the replacement of all your cells except for maybe your skeleton, every 7 years. Every cell in your body is replaced every 7 years. And that happens entirely unconsciously. And so it knows what it's doing, and it does it successfully for 100 years for a lot of people now. And so that's what we have to understand. We have to understand that we have this God image. We can think of it as God. People always have thought of it as God. God is taking care of us. So as I often say about the football player who prays to God is actually petitioning his own self to get him into the gym, to build up his strength and get him out on the track running, so it builds up his speed so that ultimately he can make that touchdown. And so if his God image isn't going to give him the oomph to do that, to have the commitment to get to the gym, to have the commitment to become a fast runner, then there's nothing that's going to make him go across the goal line. That just won't happen. And there's no Geppetto up in the sky who's pulling his strings making it happen. It has to come from the self, and if the self doesn't want that to happen, it won't happen. You won't go to the gym. And if you don't go to the gym, you're not going to make the touchdown either. You're not going to make the goal, whatever it is. And so so that's the God that you're actually praying to. You're petitioning that self to do the necessary, and you're petitioning the broader self, the broader God image, which is the unconscious, the collective unconscious, to provide the elements that you need to win. Okay, whether it's the elements of having a school that has a football team, there are a lot of things that have to come in to create that school, or there are a lot of things for a professional team, whether it's a soccer team or a cricket team or a baseball team or American football team. A lot of inputs go into making that team, including having the fans there, including having the stadium there, including all the officials and all the grounds people and all that stuff all has to come together. And it's magic. When it happens, it has to all come together, and so you have to pray.
A symphony. It's a symphony.
It's a symphony. That's right. And there's no one human being that's the orchestra director, right? Okay. There's no single human being that's the orchestra director that can make it always right. Otherwise we could have football with, even in times of coronavirus, right? But we can't, or it's not going to be the same if we have basketball games or football games that have no fans there. It's not going to be the same game, because the psychic energy that's presented unconsciously by the fans will not be present. And that makes a difference. So, okay, so it's 10 o'clock, and I have gotten through all of those comments, and I hope that's been helpful. So next week, we are going to return, though, to Memories, Dreams, Reflections, having taken that detour for 3 weeks. And I hope that my friend who posted those questions feels like we've addressed them a little bit more fully.
It was very helpful to me, because the discussion with examples and your life experience, it clarifies a lot of important idea structures. I'm sure a lot of people would try it in their time to read the books by either Dr. Jung or Edinger, but you have firsthand living experience of it. Your explanation actually puts like meat on the skeleton. It's hard to actually guess sometimes. So it has been helpful for me, your discussion. It's been very nice, not just today, always today more so. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And so Idris, you kindly provided a image, but that wasn't the one I was looking for. So
it's
I will try to find that image, because I need to put these frequently used images in one place where I know where to look for them.
In one of your recent videos, it was there. I think it had a black image, and there was this small circle that was inside on the leftmost, and then slowly it was emerging out, and the rightmost had exactly above it. And there was a
that's the image. It's from that same series of images in Ion. But it wasn't that one. It's figure 6, not figure 5.
I haven't saved it with myself, so I couldn't find
Yeah.
it.
Okay. So I'll
Thank
pull
you.
it up. I'll pull that one up again because that's an important one. So, Jing, thank you for being here tonight, and Nick, thank you for coming from Singapore. We have Nick, you know that we're now having these sessions on Sunday morning, my time, which is 8 p.m. your time, on Sundays, which are basic sessions for mainly aimed at people that live in China. And so they're...
Oh, wow. Okay.
And do you speak Mandarin, Nick?
Quite badly. I mean, I can, but very basic. Just a bit better than ordering food.
Okay. About like me, maybe then.
Yeah, yeah, but I can manage. Yeah, not
Yeah.
not too deep. It's okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm doing that every week for the time being, which will be Sunday morning, my time at 8 a.m. But for your time, it would be 8 p.m.
Cool. Yep. I
Just,
will. I'll try.
just so you
Yep.
know. And
Thanks. Thanks.
and I did the first one the other day. Let's see. Oh, it looks like we're going to be able to schedule a woman named Melissa Townsend, who has done a very interesting series of books. This is one of them. Wait a minute. Okay, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, a visual meditation guide. Now, what's interesting here is she, for each verse of these sutras, she has, let me cut my virtual background here. It's very irritating sometimes. Okay, so here's the book, and for each verse of this Patanjali, which is 195 verses, she's got a complete discussion of the verse, and she's done a separate painting on it. And I've been studying this thing now, and it just pops off the page for me. And what I found is just reading like the first 25 of them, I can now envision the verse, each verse in order, because I can think of her paintings, and which is something, you know, it's very difficult to memorize something if it's in prose, but what this does, because it's an image, you see it on the right brain rather than the left brain, right? And so it actually activates the other side of your psyche. And so I've found it very interesting that I can just click off these verses and I can bring to mind each of these images that she's created in order. And so anyway, I'm hoping on the 11th of July, we will have a session which will be at 10 a.m. your time on the 12th of July.
Wow.
Right.
Where is she from?
She is from the San Francisco area, I believe.
Oh, nice. Yep.
Yeah. And so that will be aimed also for people in Asia, but everybody in the United States too. For me, it's going to be 10 p.m. my time, so it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. But for everybody that's west of me, it's going to be a good time. And so for Idris, like for example, it'll be 7 in the evening. And we won't do one this coming. We won't do one this coming weekend because it's our 4th of July holiday weekend, but it'll be the week after that, I hope. Still negotiating on the date. And she also did a series of tarot cards, which are also very interesting. So I've proposed to her that we do a separate session with her about the tarot and about her. She's done 2 decks of tarot cards, so those are very interesting.
Wow.
Too. So anyway, that's coming up. And also tentatively, Anne Belford Ulanoff has tentatively agreed to join us. We haven't settled on the date as yet, but she's a person who served as, she's currently titled Emerita Professor of Psychiatry and Religion at Union Theological Seminary, which is one of our leading theological seminaries in New York City. And she's written 17 books by herself and another 6 with her husband. And she's going to talk to us about redemption, which I think is a very good topic, because all of us need to be redeemed. What that means is that when something bad happens to us, we have to be made good and we have to keep going, like the oak tree that loses its limb, or me when I lost I didn't lose my leg, but I broke my leg, which meant that I lost my Marine Corps career because I couldn't really continue to serve after it was repaired. And so things like that happen to us throughout life. And when those things happen, we have to be able to know how to redeem ourselves so that we can go on and still make a contribution to the world. That's what it does. So has this been too weird with my eye patch? I'm just wondering, it's my first experience with it.
It's a
Told
good
you
look.
that you need it for reading the book and items in front of you, so we understand that it was needed for the reading.
Yeah.
But you can tell new viewers what is the purpose behind.
Well, yes, for new viewers, the reason for the eye patch is that I'm old, and when you get old, things start to change. And one of the things that changes is that the muscles in your eye can change, or they can stretch, and then they don't quite work the same. And so I've been, as a result of that fact, I've been seeing double for about 18 months now. And yeah, the archetype.
How come only now?
Pardon?
How come only now?
Well, because my eyes were okay before this, right?
Oh, okay.
But you know, when you get old enough, then these muscles in your eyeballs start to stretch, and then something has to happen. So my doctor told me that one of our other patients has the same problem, and he had surgery for it, and it didn't help. So, you know, I don't really want to go have surgery if it's not going to help. And so I asked her if I could wear an eye patch, because I had been just closing my eye so I could see, you know, because I can see out of both eyes, but when I see double, it's hard to read, right? And so, so she said, yeah, wear a patch. So I'm experimenting, and it worked all right. I mean, for that hour or so that I was doing it tonight, it seemed to be okay. And Nancy says, Nancy's with us, and it's nice to have you here, Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
To see you here. She says, the eye patch is just fine. Okay, well, that's good. Okay, so I have to go on to my reading of the Bhagavad-Gita for tonight, so I'm going to excuse myself for this week. And next week, we will go on with Memory Streams Reflections. And when we do that, we will be on page 343. And it will be with the first full paragraph on that page, and that paragraph and the next paragraph relate to individuation first, and then the need for a secret and why one has to have a secret. And so that's a very interesting aspect of Jungian psychology, is to understand why you have to have a secret. And so,
mystics of all traditions, Islamic mystics, also Christian mystics, they do believe developing your inner world, which you can also call that keeping a secret. And I'm very much interested to ask Professor Emerita, I missed her name. I would like to ask her about two concepts that's very interesting in Christian mysticism, but it's universal. All human beings can experience it. One is the dark night of the soul. Another is baptism by fire. So my current understanding is at times a believer might go through a period, which Mother Teresa said she did in her private letters to the Catholic Church. She's went through something between 40 to 50 years of her final years of life, not feeling any indication of presence of God, which she did before that. And it was termed as dark night of the soul. And according to the Christian theology and mysticism, this is something that some favored human beings actually go through it and their faith gets tested. Another one is called baptism by fire, which according to my understanding is at certain point in life, a person might lose everything they have. They might lose their wife, their probably like property, and they're left stranded, completely stranded in life. And they get purified, and a new human being is born from that moment onwards. So I'd like to hear her opinions about how she sees those definitions, how it works in every ordinary human being, not Mother Teresa type people, but just next door neighbor.
Okay, I also am prepared to address the second issue, but next week. If you ask me next week, I will address it.
That's great synchronicity. You are preparing for the same.
But I've been prepared for that for quite a while now, because I used to call it the combat officer's phenomenon, which was that when you're a young officer, you're always worried about somebody dropping a rocket on your head, or an artillery shell, or putting a bullet through your skull type thing, right? But something happens that gets you past that, and then you never worry about it again. And so both Patton and Douglas MacArthur were famous for having come to the front lines and actually walked out in front of the front lines during big battles. And, they wouldn't try to hide in any way. They wouldn't take cover. They would just go out and talk to the men. And they never
Can you please tell me the full names of these two individuals?
George Patton, General George Patton, and General Douglas MacArthur.
Yes, I know the second one. Thank you.
Yeah. So, but I have a little homily that I can give you on that next week. Okay. All right. So thank you
very much
being here tonight, everyone, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Good night.
Goodbye. Nice to see you.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye, Nick.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Nice to see you, Nick. Bye-bye.
Nice